Okay, so let's take a look at how we can create and manage user accounts in Active Directory users and computers. So I'm going to go to Tools and ADUC, Active Directory users and computers. Now, here's my domain, and I can select where I want this user to go. Now, something to be aware of, the default location for users is going to be here inside the users folder. Typically, I'll want to put users inside specific organizational units, however. But there's a couple of ways to do this. So I can click this button right here to create a new user. I can right click to create a new user account. I can go into a specific location or right click here to create a specific user account. So let me create a new account here in my guests. So I'm going to right click, new, and user. Now, my new user is going to be fairly straightforward. So first name, we're going to create one for Danny Kincannon, and Dkincannon. I should have used a shorter one there. And it's going to default here. So I set the username. It's going to default to at whatever domain I'm in. And then I'm going to have a pre-Windows Server 2000 reference to it as well. And click Next. Now here I set the password for my new user. And then I've got four options. User must change password and next log on. Now this is something we're probably going to use most of the time. That way we just don't remember what the password is. We don't know because when they first log in, they're presented with the screen that says you have to change your password. And they can't go any farther until they do. Anytime we reset someone's password, we normally want to leave this checked. When we create a new user, we want to leave this checked. Now there is one variance to that, and that is if I'm going to be setting up a shared account, which normally not a good idea, but there are a few instances where it fits. Or if I'm setting up a service account, which means the service it's going to be used by a service, not by an interactive user. Then I probably don't want to set password. User must change password next logon. I can also block them from changing their password. You can't do both. It has issues with that. I can set it so that their password never expires, and I can disable the account by default. And this happens sometimes if I'm pre-staging an account. So I've hired somebody. They're going to start working for me in 3 weeks. I've got a little extra time. I'm going to go ahead and create their account, get it all set up, but I don't want that account to be active yet, so I check the account is disabled. Then it's all set and ready for them to go. When they come in, all I have to do is enable that account. All right, let me click Next. And let me make sure my passwords match first. Now let me click Next. Hey, there we go. And we create a new user. Now, because I clicked on Guest, let me get that to the right place, the new user, Danny Kincannon, goes directly there. Now, you want to be careful sometimes because sometimes somebody will be selected on the domain and they'll create a new user. And this time let's create a regular staff user, or what we intend to be a regular staff user. And let's say this is going to be Sam Seaborn. Seaborn, and set the password, and next, and finish. Okay, now because I was selected on the domain out here, I intended for this to go to the West Wing staff, but it didn't. Because I was selected on the domain, my user actually exists at the root level of the domain. Now that's not necessarily a horrible thing. Normally not what we want. Again, we're going to clutter up Active Directory if we do that. But it will function. The problem is that we apply group policies to our organizational units, and we apply delegation to organizational units. So this user outside of those organizational units doesn't get the benefit of that delegation or those group policies. So to move a user, all we've got to do is click and drag to move the user and drop them where we want to go. Moving objects can prevent, yeah, we know. So we hit yes, and now Sam Seaborn is moved, and you can move them anywhere that way, from anywhere to anywhere. Okay, so we've created a user, we've moved a user. Let's take a look at some of the options of our users. So we're going to right click and go to Properties. All right, the General tab here is going to give us basic information about them. So first name, last name, display name, description, office, telephone number, email, web page. Address is going to give us more information about them, all their addressing information. Now, this information is available in Active Directory, and we can search Active Directory for that. So let's say I want to search for all of my users who are in Virginia. Well, if I have that information here in my state and province, I can actually use Active Directory to find that information. So it does pay sometimes, even though we don't have to put all of this in when we create the user. In fact, when we create the user, it didn't even ask us for it. In PowerShell or something like that, when we're creating users a command line, we can put in more options if we want. Other than that, we have to come back in here and modify them. But it does make sense to do that sometimes because of the search capabilities. So telephones, we have phone numbers, we have organizational information like what's their title, their department, their company. I will actually use this at the college occasionally. I will search for people by department if I can't remember who all works in a particular department. All right, so all of that is basic information about them. Under your Account tab is where their username is going to be and the option to unlock their account. So if somebody locks their account because they've entered a password incorrectly too many times, this is where we go to unlock it. Here's where we can set their password options and their account is disabled options. We can also set an account expiration. So we can, let's say we hire somebody in a 90-day temp contract. We can set this expires at the end of, and we can set a day and it'll automatically expire that account. Now, two other buttons up here that are kind of important. Logon Hours. This is what hours is somebody allowed to log on to a system. So I can say I don't want Sam Seaborn working on weekends. So I'm going to select Sunday and say log on denied, and I'm going to take Saturday and say log on denied. And now Sam Seaborn can't log on. Now he can log on anytime Monday through Friday, but he can't log on Saturday or Sunday. I can also set specific hours. So let's say I don't want him logging in before 6 o'clock on weekdays. So I can do a log on denied and block that out. And down here it's going to tell you we've selected Monday through Friday, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. That's kind of useful because sometimes over here you can't really see the date or the time really well. So this says I've selected 7 p.m. to 12. Let's say I actually want to make that 6. So I know I need to go over one more. And now I can confirm that, yeah, I've got that right time. And so I'm going to deny logon and hit OK. All right, so now I've allowed or set when they're allowed to log on. Log on to determines which computers they're allowed to log on to. Now, I don't have any computers in this domain yet. But what I could do if I had that is I could say they're allowed to log into all computers as default. I can say they're only allowed to log into the following computers. And I have to have a computer account in place for that to work. And computer accounts, we can either make them or they get automatically generated when a system joins the domain. So I can restrict them to logging onto specific stations. Profile information. This defines the profile path, the logon script, their home folder, and if we want them to automatically connect to a network share. This isn't used nearly as much anymore because we do a lot of these things through group policies. Now, Microsoft still keeps it intact so that we do have it available if we need it, but typically that's going to be because somebody had profiles predefined, logon scripts predefined, and they just haven't changed it yet. Now, one thing to be aware of with the profile, by default, the profile is stored locally on the system. So when you log in, it builds your profile. And that profile is going to include your start menu options, your specific, your desktop, what it looks like, the structure of items in your start menu, your documents folder. All this stuff is going to be by default set in your profile, which exists on the local machine. And the downside is if you go from one machine to another machine, When you go to that second machine, when you log in, you don't have that same profile, so you have to rebuild it all. So what some people will do is they'll use roaming profiles, and they're coming here to the profile path, and they'll specify a path, and frequently they'll do it as a UNC path name, server1 / profiles / scborn. And then whenever this user logs in, it'll look for server1 profiles scborn, and it will download that profile to the local machine. Now it still has it locally, but it's just cached locally. So whenever they log off, then it uploads all of their changes back to that remote profile or roaming profile, because that profile is available for them now wherever they go. Interesting idea, and used to get used quite a bit. It's not used as much anymore now because we tend to force files to be saved to server locations. One of the big drawbacks of roaming profiles is that it could really extend the amount of time that it took you to log on or log off, especially if you had a lot of data in your profile. All right, let's take a look at a couple of other tabs here. Remote control. This is if somebody is connected through remote desktop services. Can you take control of their system? Remote desktop services profile, similar thing to the regular profile. If they're connecting through remote desktop services, how do we treat them? So these two are both specific to that. Member of is one that we'll deal with quite a bit. This is what groups are they a member of. Primary group we really don't need to deal with anymore. We haven't for ages. Dial-in has to do with are they allowed access through dial-up connections. Now that dial-up connections doesn't always mean telephone dial-up. Normally what it means now is through VPN and we're doing radius. This is being replaced by the NPS, the Network Policy Services. So, environment sessions, COM, those are a little more specific. We don't deal with those as much. The ones we're going to deal with the most are going to be a member of, and then their general tab, any information on the address, telephone, or organizational tab, and then the account tab are the ones we are going to deal with far and away the most. Okay. Couple of more things real quick. Let's talk about disabling a user account. Sam Seaborn is going on vacation. I'm going to right click and disable his account. Now his account is still there. You'll notice we have this little icon, the little down arrow there. Okay, his account is still there. Everything's still intact. You just can't log into it. That's what disabling does, is it keeps you from logging into that account. So he can't log in, which he's on vacation. We don't want him to. When he comes back, we right click and we enable account. Now, frequently when somebody leaves the company, what we'll do is we'll disable their account for a while. And then that information is still there. We can still log in as them. If we need to access something as them, we can. We just have to re-enable the account. Frequently we'll do that rather than deleting the account, and then we'll let that set, and this depends on your organizational policies, sometimes up to 6 months or more. We'll just let that set disabled, and then after they've been gone for 6 months, we know we don't need anything more from that account. We'll go delete it at that point. All right, for that we right click and delete the account. We can also rename the account. This comes into play. Let's say somebody changed their last name, somebody got married. Okay, so we can rename the account. Now that renames the account here. That doesn't necessarily change. Let me go back to my properties. Their information here. So we really need to make sure it gets changed in both places. Also, this is something I've seen people do. They'll rename the account, and they will change the last name, the display name, but here under account, they didn't come in and change the login name. And so somebody may be logging in under an old name. So make sure if you go to change somebody's name, you catch it at all the correct places. Another common thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reset passwords. So if somebody forgets their password, we're going to have to reset it for them, and this is pretty common. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you are using EFS, which is the encrypting file system used by NTFS, if you are using EFS encryption and you reset somebody's password, their encryption key is tied to their username and password. So if they do not have that encryption key backed up and you reset the password, you destroy that and they cannot get back into their encrypted files. If they have that encryption key backed up, then we can recover it. But that's something just to be aware of. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how we can work with and manage user accounts in Active Directory users and computers.